the people living in Israel are part and parcel with the Jewish people, and it's one body. And therefore, they should feel that it's their success. I think that's something that we're trying to achieve.
Rabbi Joey, thank you for being on my show, 20-Minute Leaders. It's very gracious of you to give me your time.
Thank you for inviting me.
Of course, of course. So we know each other from J Ventures, where you're also an LP. And while J Ventures has this incredible mission of both investing as part of a capitalistic kibbutz, but while bringing together Jewish Americans and Israelis, you're approaching this issue of the difference between the two communities, not necessarily from a financial and an investment route, but more from a more cultural and community aspect, right?
Right. In other words, I think that the Jewish community has a lot to offer the Israeli community and vice versa. And I think the commonality between both is our Judaism.
Okay, so right before we get into that, I'd love you to give me a little bit of background about yourself. Where are you from, and how did you even get to Silicon Valley, and to ask yourself the question, how do I work with these two communities within the Bay Area?
Okay, so I'm originally from Toronto, Canada. Toronto is a very, very strong Jewish community, also with a very large Israeli population.
Yep.
And I grew up there in day schools. I had a very strong Jewish education. I ended up getting a degree there in university in political science. And I went afterwards to go and study to become a rabbi in Israel. I went to yeshivot, and I got my ordination while I was in Jerusalem. And when I was a student on campus, I was very active in a lot of Jewish activism, both on behalf of Israel, but also all sorts of other Jewries. It was before the Iron Curtain fell, because I'm quite old. And so I was busy fighting to get the Jews out of the Soviet Union and Ethiopia and Syria. And that was sort of my career when I was in college. I eventually became the vice president of something called the World Union of Jewish Students. And from there, I decided that if I wanted to make a real impact on the Jewish world, the best idea would be to get a very strong Jewish education and be able to connect people to their heritage. So I left Canada, I went to Israel, I was there for 8.5 years.
Wow. Studied for 8.5 years.
I did.
Wow.
And I ended up getting married after the first 6.5. And my wife and I, after the first 2 years, I was there married 6.5 years. And while I was in Israel, I was trying to figure out what my next step would be. And people always spoke about the Bay Area as this anomaly, that there is a black hole on the Jewish map because it was underserviced with respect to Jewish education. There were very few day schools. There were very few kids going to day schools. There was not much around, and especially within the more traditional community, there was very, very little. There were a few synagogues that were here that were tiny. There were a couple Chabad shluchim that were here. And so when we looked around, it looked like an amazing opportunity to try to do something in the field of Jewish education. I ended up putting a team together in Israel, and we all came as 6 families. We moved here in 2001, and we started what's called the Jewish Study Network. And the tagline is to raise the level of Jewish literacy in the Bay Area.
Now, is this for both Israelis and American Jewish people, or is this just for American Jews? What's sort of the target audience for this?
It's for both. It's for everybody.
Okay, wonderful. And that alludes to an interesting point, because it's a very, I think this is a very interesting conversation, especially because I'm here living in Palo Alto, and basically across the street from you, I'm a secular Jew, very Israeli coming in. My main affiliation with the JCC, I just had a great conversation with Zach Bodner, and I told him that I love the JCC because I get to go and listen to Israeli artists who come here. But I don't really go to synagogue, and I see Judaism more in the traditional aspect of it, and I feel that that's a part of the the disparity between the American Jews and Israelis. Do you feel that same way, or do you see it differently?
Well, so there is a disparity like that. One thing that I find, though, is that for a lot of Israelis that come here and decide to try to at least investigate Judaism, it's their first foray into something that's very, very rich. And people get very excited. So there are a lot of Israelis that actually have started trying to study Talmud and trying to study the Torah and really figure out what is it that defines Judaism beyond the nationalism that they're definitely familiar with.
And which is ironic because they're coming from, Israel, and now they're coming to the Gola, and all of a sudden they're becoming more Jewish.
That's right. That's right. And they're definitely becoming more knowledgeable about being Jewish.
Right.
That for sure is happening here. And in a place like Silicon Valley, people are highly intellectual, highly curious, and very motivated. So if they spend even just a little bit of their energy in trying to explore something Jewish, it ends up being a very productive experience for them.
Okay, what is Jewish studies? I've never went to a Jewish day school. I've never studied the Talmud. So give me a very brief. What is Jewish studies overall?
Okay, Jewish studies is a study for us at the Jewish Study Network. It's primarily a look at the classic texts that sort of define the Jewish people. So the Torah is the first, and it's the most obvious. But if you go beyond the Torah and the rest of Tanakh, there is a whole wealth of literature that we have managed to produce over the past couple millennia dealing with all sorts of things. So the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, I would say, is first and foremost. It's almost like a time capsule in which all of Judaism has been preserved by the sages a couple thousand years ago. And it deals with everything from law. Law is certainly a big part of it, Jewish law in particular. But there's also a perspective on things that people would find cultural. There are recipes, there are language conversations, there's really sort of the experience of what it means to be part of this people.
Right.
The Jewish people are particularly difficult to define because it's hard to define them as a nation because they lived for thousands of years without a state. It's also hard to define them as a religion, because people who are not religious are still considered to be completely part of the Jewish people, right? There are people that don't believe in God, and yet they're as Jewish as somebody who does believe in God as long as they follow other criteria. So it's almost like this anomaly of a people that exists on the planet that has been through an incredible history and that has contributed to the world in so many different ways in terms of a sense of not just the morality and the ethics that we say come from the Torah, but even contributing in terms of science and the understanding of the way the world operates. For me, it's not an accident that there are so many Nobel Prize winners that happen to come from the Jewish people. They're driven, they're motivated, and I think that there's just, when it comes to studying Judaism, there is so much there. When people come to me and they say that they want to try to understand, so I usually direct them towards a class in the Torah portion. Let them at least see what it's like beyond the Bible stories that they learned when they were very little. Or I'll send them to something like Ethics of the Fathers, Pirkei Avot, where they get to understand sort of the moral underpinnings of what it means to be a society based around morality. And I think that all of the things that people study, they usually walk away saying that this informs their current life. Because one thing that we believe very strongly is that human nature hasn't changed over thousands of years. We might have new technology, and we might look a little bit different in terms of the way that we dress, but the way that we are intrinsically is still the same. And so the sages, in their wisdom, managed to articulate values and principles that are as relevant today as they were thousands of years ago.
Right. I mean, one of the things that I've discovered here, especially at Stanford, is that it's not only Jews that do Jewish studies, but a lot of these things are relevant also for the average global citizen. That the lessons learned about the community and culture and respect, they are cross religion and they're cross borders. Is that something that you also find, or do you think, contrary to that it is mainly for Jewish people?
No, I would say like this. I think that there is so much of it that should be universal, and the way that we approach it is universal.
Right.
We believe that there's a plan for the whole world. It's not just a plan for the Jewish people. We just believe that when it comes to certain laws, that we as the Jewish people have a higher level of responsibility to follow particular laws. In other words, we're supposed to be a little bit distinct, and the expression "a light into the nations," we're supposed to be an example of what it means to live a moral and ethical life. In all of our classes, I think there are people that are not Jewish that come to experience and to learn, and they gain. And I think that when it comes to a sense of ethics and morality, Judaism has informed a lot of the conversations that take place both in medicine and in law and all sorts of other arenas. In fact, organizations like the Jewish Study Network are asked to give continuing education credits in the field of ethics for all sorts of professional fields because there's value that's universal.
Wow. So where are we headed now? So one of the key things that I've observed in Israel is definitely a very clear separation and a growing separation, unfortunately, between secular Jews and religious Jews. I haven't yet experienced this here, but coming in from your perspective of Jewish studies and trying to bring together these two tribes here in Silicon Valley and looking more globally at the world, where are the Jewish people headed, and what is our role in helping make sure that it's headed the right way?
So that's a very good question. I think that it's true that the media likes to report on the flashpoints of conflict between the religious community and the secular community. I think in reality that the communities are starting to understand each other a little differently. So for example, within the ultra-religious in Israel, there is a big shift in which people are deciding to embrace secular education in a way that they haven't before. I'm sure you're familiar with Kamatech.
I was just about to talk about Moshe Friedman because I love him to bits and he's incredible, Yeah, he is incredible. And what he's doing is amazing. And it's just the tip of the iceberg. There are many people that are starting to realize that that community can't continue to exist at the levels of poverty that they've been living at, and that they have to embrace some sense of modernity when it comes to providing for themselves. And they're doing so. And the media doesn't like to talk about it as much. It's not as exciting as the wars that go on between the communities. But I do believe that there's a very big shift. I think that I am a little concerned with the relationship between Israel and the diaspora. I think that the Jewish community in the diaspora is not as in touch with the centrality that Israel should play within Judaism. Right.
So they see it as something other than themselves. It's the Jewish homeland, but they don't necessarily feel as connected to it as they should. And I think that it's the responsibility of the community here to take a look at the way that we're educating our young people, right? The ones that do get a Jewish education, why are they not walking away with a passion for Israel? Right. I think that that is a failing that has to be addressed.
No, definitely. I'm very involved with the Birthright program, and I also have a Gidi Mark, the CEO of Birthright, on this show, and I did a few of those trips myself, and what I find is that there's the minute you have somebody walk into Israel and see the miracle of the Holy Land and the startup nation part of it as well. I think that one of the most important things that we can do for Israel is talk about put aside some of the conflicts and the politics and the religion, just talk about the miracle of the startup nation and what the incredible things that it has done. And I see how eye-opening it is for people who read the book Startup Nation for the first time, and they really understand that, wow, like a nation of now 9 million people in this heart of conflict is able to produce such magnificent work. I think that's a major part, and obviously the Jewish studies is important, but I also think that combining that with the intellect and combining that with the successes, I think that's incredible.
Right, I think so also. The trick is trying to figure out how to convince the American Jewish community that they should get what we call the nachas from the startup nation.
What is that? The what?
Nachat.
Oh, nachat, yeah.
That they should feel that it's theirs also. Right? I think that's the piece that's missing.
Yes.
So it's wonderful to read about the startup nation, but if you feel that it's not you, then you're just reading about somebody else's success, which might be inspiring. But if the Jewish community can embrace the notion that that is who they are, in other words, the people living in Israel are part and parcel with the Jewish people, and it's one body, and therefore they should feel that it's their success. I think that's something that we're trying to achieve.
Is there a worry that within this centrality and pulling together as one body, that the Jewish people can start alienating or continue alienating others around the world who then view the Jewish people as, you know, this closed group, closed-minded? Is that a worry that we have, or do you not think that's the case?
I personally don't worry so much about that. I think that if you look at Jewish history over the span of the thousands of years, for most people, they weren't interested in us integrating into them, right? That was never a desire per se. And in terms of today, where people are willing to allow us to integrate, I think that people have a certain element of respect as long as we're prepared to share. Meaning, if we were isolated to the point that we developed technology that we weren't exporting to the rest of the world, then that would be a problem. Or if we had morality and ethics that we weren't prepared to share with the rest of the world, that would also be a problem. But the stronger that we become as a people, the more influence we can have on others for the positive. And I think that that's something that they would also embrace.
Okay. No, that's fascinating. So, Rabbi, you know, we just have a few minutes left, but I'd love to get to know, you know, what is like your favorite teaching, the thing that you enjoy most teaching, whether that's at Stanford or through the JSN, like your number one class or idea?
That's a great question. I love teaching the Torah, and specifically, there's one section in the book of Dvarim, of Deuteronomy.
I'd love to learn.
The Ep149.
Okay.
And if someone were to ask me, Rabbi, I can only come to one of your classes 1 week of the year, which should I come to? I would tell you to come to that particular class. And the reason is because it contains all the fundamentals of Judaism pretty much in one place.
Okay, so give me, you know, in the 1 minute thing, what is the fundamental according to you with that?
So I think the fundamentals are that there is a God who created the world, and he demands a level of morality and obedience from us. That we believe that he took us out of Egypt not so that we would be free of anything, but that we would become slaves to him, meaning that we would live our lives with a sense of purpose, and that God created the world with a sense of purpose, and our job is to help fulfill that mission. That's some of what you can get from that parsha.
Mm-hmm. And you know, but that too, do you find that is sometimes also could potentially alienate people who are Jews but don't come from that background, who might come in and say, like, you know, as a secular Jew, I'm hearing like, wow, be slave to God and go with the purpose of fulfilling his mission. So how do you balance that with, you know, trying to bring in Israelis and helping them understand Judaism better and, you know, and be more fond of it?
So I'll tell you the truth. I think the more that people study, including secular Israelis, and there are a lot of secular Israelis that I study with, the more they start to realize that there is a lot of brilliance and there's a lot of wisdom, and they start to realize that there's a system that is incredible, that is incredibly progressive. It doesn't fit anyone's preconceived notions when it comes to all sorts of issues. I think, unfortunately, Judaism is a bit of a victim of being slapped together with other world religions. And so people are familiar with other religions. They assume the same applies to Judaism, and they don't realize that there is a different take on all sorts of issues. Everything from women's issues to financial issues to the issues of how to structure an economy, right? The fact that Judaism is capitalistic and yet it has a way of defanging capitalism so that it supports everybody, right? It's a very intricate structure. The more people spend time studying that, the more they start to realize that there is a lot of value in it.
Interesting.
So what I would say is I would encourage people like yourself to just take a little time and investigate. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised that it's something that you'll find meaningful, and it'll help inform the way that you interact with people. For many people, they find that it helps with their marriage, it helps them as parents, it helps with the way that they interact with their community, and people feel that there is a more meaningful, purposeful life. Right.
No, and I definitely, you know, the number one thing that I take from this is also this idea of open-mindedness, and I'm definitely holding myself to be open-minded and learning anything and everything that I can. And I think one of the issues with religion in general is that people come with preconceived notions or little sound bites. They come up with conclusions, and then they have their belief with those conclusions. And I think that this investigation is something that we all owe to ourselves. By the way, not just necessarily through Judaism. I would love to also investigate the Quran a little bit and investigate Christianity and understand the world a little bit better. And I think actually that's one of the key aspects of empathizing and solving a lot of these conflicts that we have, is being able to understand each other better. Rabbi Joey, right before we leave, I have to ask you the most important question. 3 words that you would use to describe yourself.
This is the most important question and probably the most difficult question.
100%.
So I would say that I'm passionate.
Yes.
I would also say that I consider myself to be God-fearing.
Okay, what does that mean?
Meaning that I try to live with a consciousness of a higher power that we call God, that's aware of what it is that I'm doing.
Okay.
It helps me do the right thing, even though sometimes I'd be tempted to do things that are not necessarily right.
Okay.
And I think the third is I would say that I try to be incredibly open and creative. I
love that. Rabbi Joey, thank you very much. Toda rabba. And
thank you, Michael.
And stay safe and stay healthy.
Okay. You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.